He said I lacked vision as he fumbled through the wrong form for $12M disbursement I'd already corrected twice that morning. That was the third time this week the new VP tried to skip federal verification on a wire transfer because it slowed down momentum. Momentum. That word had become a kind of corporate cologne around here, cheap, strong, and trying too hard to cover the stench of incompetence. I was 17 years into this circus, 17 years of staying late to triple-check account verifications, of keeping the Treasury Department happy, of explaining, gently, always gently, to fresh-out of MBA clowns why registered seals aren't decorative. I'd written half the compliance playbook these jokers skimmed before marching into boardrooms like they invented math. And yet, every time I opened my mouth in meetings, I got the same look you'd give a fax machine that dared to beep during a PowerPoint. Necessary but annoying. They called me sharp. That's what people say when they know you're right but wish you weren't. I was the Treasury seal holder, meaning my signature didn't just close books, it made money move. You want to send anything over 10 million through certain accounts? You don't get to click send until I say yes. Quiet power, invisible authority. But let's be real, none of that mattered when the VP was posturing for the board. I was background noise. Compliance ghost in top slacks. By the way, if you've listened this far and you like stories where the quiet woman everyone ignores ends up holding the nuclear football, hit that subscribe button. It tells the algorithm we're not just yelling into the void here. And throw us a like while you're at it, keeps the team caffeinated and just petty enough to keep digging up these gems. Anyway, on this particular Tuesday, the bronze seal clipped to my badge tapped lightly against the boardroom glass as I leaned in to correct his numbers. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't roll my eyes. I simply said, per Treasury regulations, that would need dual verification at the 25 threshold. He smiled, tight and brittle like his molars were doing the math. Actually, Patricia, that only applies if the wire's foreign. I held up the file. It's routed through the Luxembourg arm. Silence. Then a cough. Then that awful slow churn humiliation that settles in when someone realizes they've already hit send without asking if the parachute's been packed. But he doubled down, called my tone unproductive, said I derailed the presentation. I almost laughed. It took effort not to. Operations folks avoided eye contact. Legal stared at his shoes. The CFO, the only one who truly knew the weight of the seal on my badge, sat frozen, lips twitching like he was trying to remember the capital of Luxembourg. I sat back, quiet, already calculating the fallout. Not emotionally, mechanically. Like a chess player watching a toddler knock over a rook and call it checkmate. They never saw the bronze seal for what it was. To them, it was a trinket. To me, it was a loaded gun with one fingerprint trigger. My fingerprint. I watched the VP stretch his spine like a peacock on Red Bull, then say the words that would set off a ticking clock no one else could hear. Patricia, I think we've seen enough. Your attitude's just not aligned with our forward culture. I didn't blink, didn't flinch. I stood, unhooked my badge, and peeled the bronze seal from the clip. It made a soft metal-on wood click as I placed it on the mahogany table, right next to his untouched coffee. No parting words, no drama, just that little round emblem sitting there like a coin on the eyes of a corpse. As I walked out, the boardroom door didn't even shut all the way before I heard someone ask, "Wait, what was that?" They'd learned soon enough. The quarterly board meeting was always a performance, think Broadway for bloated egos, except with worse lighting and more acronyms. I'd been through 67 of them, I counted. Enough to know that actual knowledge was optional, but optics were gospel. The new VP, Dominic, yes, Dominic, like some character from a knockoff Wall Street fanfic, had decided to make his big splash. He wore a navy suit so tight I could see the outline of his misplaced confidence. He had a clicker in one hand and a smirk in the other, and he strutted into that room like he was about to pitch sliced bread to the Amish. Due to internal efficiencies, he began. You can fast-track the Luxembourg transaction by bypassing dual verification. The compliance risk is negligible. I was sitting 2 seats down, not even supposed to speak during this part, but my body reacted before my brain had time to strategize. I didn't raise my hand. I just cleared my throat. Actually, I said, voice low but steady, Treasury regs still require dual verification on any wire over 10 million routed internationally, even through subsidiaries. He turned, the smirk already cracking at the corners. I appreciate your input, Patricia, but we confirmed this with Treasury's regional liaison. No, I said, calmly flipping open the binder in front of me, you spoke to an associate on the domestic desk. Luxembourg's routing classifies this as international. The verification thresholds apply. And just like that, the air went syrupy. You could feel the oxygen shrink. Someone from investor relations shifted in their seat. The CEO frowned into his coffee, pretending to read a note he hadn't written. Dominic's face flushed the color of expired ketchup. He clicked his slides forward like maybe the pixels would rescue him. We'll move on, he muttered, before pivoting into a slide about leadership values. Oh, the irony. 5 minutes later, he made it clear he wasn't done with me. Before we wrap, he said, stepping out from behind the table, there's one more point of alignment we need to address. He turned to the board and said it like it was a business update. Effective immediately, Patricia's position is being phased out. We appreciate her many years of service, but we're streamlining roles that don't align with our evolving structure. It landed with a weird, muffled thud. Even the CEO blinked like someone had fired a Nerf gun in church. There was no prior notice, no restructure memo, just this. I waited a beat, looked at the board. No one met my eyes, I stood, no tears, no tantrum, just a bone-deep weariness I couldn't hide. I reached up, removed my badge from its clip, and unhooked the bronze Treasury seal like I was unbuckling a safety harness I'd worn too long. It was heavier than it looked, not in weight but in what it carried, authority no one in that room understood. I placed it quietly on the polished wood table. No dramatics, just finality. The kind of gesture that wouldn't mean anything until it did. Then I walked out. Nobody stopped me. Nobody said a word, and most importantly, nobody asked what the hell that seal was. I didn't even get a cardboard box, just a crinkled plastic bag from the copy room that smelled like toner and someone's leftover salad. Fitting, really. My entire exit was handled with the same half-baked laziness they used to update software licenses, meaning they didn't. No speech, no cake, no awkward HR escort with a let's not make this weird pep talk. Just the low hum of fluorescent lights as I dropped my mug, 2 binders of annotated compliance notes, and a dying succulent into the bag. The plant had been on my desk since the 2013 audit. It hadn't bloomed in years, and I decided it could die in peace with me. I sent one final email, 5 words, 2 consequences. 2 legal subject, Treasury seal returned. Revocation pending, no emoji, no passive-aggressive sign-off, just the procedural reality of what they'd just undone. See, there's a ledger the Treasury Department keeps. Not public, not even internal to most companies. It's part of the Financial Verification Accountability Index, FVI, which, again, no one here had ever bothered to Google. Buried in that index is a list of certified seal holders, by registration number, by company, by date of last confirmation. And now, as of 2:14 p.m., my name had been flagged for deactivation. Normally, that's a straightforward transition. HR notifies the compliance team. The compliance team initiates a reassignment protocol. Treasury gets pinged. They ask for a new designee. Everyone signs a form. All tidy. But guess what happens when you fire the only person who knows that process exists? Exactly nothing. At 2:17 p.m., the Treasury compliance software sent out its standard alert. Seal holder status change unassigned flag. Immediate attention required compliance trigger. 10-day window before revocation, formalized the system bleeped. Somewhere in the back end of the financial controls dashboard, a tiny orange dot appeared next to our company profile. It might as well have been blinking Morse code. You're screwed. But no one saw it. No one looked for it. Because Dominic, in all his aftershave-soaked glory, had already told the board my duties were non-critical. He'd waved off the idea of a transition plan with a smirk and something about moving fast. Her function was mostly clerical, he said, later quoted in the internal Slack chat like he was some oracle of efficiency, reassigning her responsibilities to operations support. By operations support, he meant Kara, the intern who still needed Google to explain the difference between a W-9 and a W-2. I like Kara, honestly, sweet girl. But the only seal she'd ever handled was the one on her college diploma. So the bronze emblem stayed in the boardroom drawer like a forgotten key to a vault no one remembered locking. And behind the scenes, the system just waited 10 days. That's all Treasury gives you before a seal holder status formally expires, and all your upper-tier authorizations go with it. Not a single person in HR clicked the compliance checklist. Not one director bothered to ask if my access had been formally revoked, reassigned, or just orphaned. I could have warned them, could have sent one last Slack message. But what was the point? They didn't want a warning, they wanted momentum. Streamlining. Vision. So I let it all slide into silence. I walked out of that building lighter than I'd felt in years. And in a quiet server in Virginia, a timer began to count down. 3 days after my exit, I sat on my porch with a glass of Merlot and a view of the neighbor's inflatable Halloween display still flopping in the November wind. One skeleton had lost its jaw, the other was tangled in fairy lights. It looked about right, spooky, chaotic, poorly maintained. A perfect metaphor for what was happening back at HQ. I still had access to the public-facing compliance portals. Anyone could check those if they knew what they were looking for. And surprise, nobody there ever had. So I watched from a distance as they staggered toward disaster in heels too high and shoes too shiny. They were prepping for the crown jewel acquisition, $280 million earmarked for locking in a cross-border merger with a Luxembourg-based logistics firm. Press releases were queued up. Internal Slack channels were pinging with champagne emojis and poorly cropped headshots of the soon-to-be-acquired leadership team. And overseeing the financial authorization? Kara, the intern, whose last email to me before I was canned had the subject line, "What's a wire sealing?" Dominic had handed off my duties to her like a used stapler. His exact words, according to my mole in ops, "It's mostly forms and rubber stamps. She can shadow someone and figure it out." Rubber stamps, bless his heart. The Treasury system doesn't shadow well. It doesn't care about your LinkedIn endorsements or your buzzwords about agility. It cares about registration, identity, and documented chain of custody on federal-level financial transactions. The $280M wire? That was flagged as requiring a seal holder's signature, plus direct Treasury verification due to a clause in the source country's bilateral oversight treaty. That clause had been part of my original review months ago. I'd left notes. I'd annotated the hell out of it. But now, those notes were in a folder marked Archived Patricia Old. Treasury sent their first automated confirmation ping at 10:46 a.m. on a Thursday. The subject line was friendly enough. Seal holder verification transaction, ID 6718. The footer, however, wasn't friendly at all. Response required within 3 business days. Missing verification may result in review or delay. The email sat unread in the shared compliance at inbox, an inbox no one had checked since the senior compliance officer went on paternity leave. Legal was unaware that my physical signature was hard-coded into the notarial documents that would go to Treasury. You don't just swap that out like a cafeteria tray. You file paperwork, you wait, you re-register. All of which, of course, no one did. At 3:12 p.m., Treasury sent a second ping, slightly more firm in tone. Meanwhile, back in the office, Dominic was practicing his speech for the board. Transformative synergy. Global reach. Unlocking scalable integration. He was wearing his blue tie, the one that screamed someone told me this looks powerful, and had the emotional warmth of a parking citation. Legal, for their part, was drafting the final merger doc package. They were still under the impression that the bronze seal would be affixed to the notarial packet by end of day Friday. They had no idea the seal had never been reassigned. No one told them, because the VP thought legal was too cautious and HR had marked my departure as non-impactful. I refreshed the compliance portal and sipped my wine. No seal on record. No reassignment. Status, unassigned. Timer, ticking. Out in the world, the PR team was prepping social media copy. Tweets with hashtags like #nextchapter and #globalvision. The kind of things people post before the plane runs out of fuel over the ocean. I sat back, kicked my feet up on the railing, and let the sunset hit my wineglass like a slow exhale. I hadn't sabotaged anything. But damn if it wasn't nice watching it unravel itself. They'd booked the big conference room, the one with the ridiculous marble table and LED screens so wide you could land a plane on them. There were pastries on silver trays, a PR team staging candids, and enough floral arrangements to suggest either a wedding or a corporate eulogy. Probably both. Dominic looked like he'd slept in a tanning bed and combed his hair with a credit card. Grinning, glowing, pacing like a groom about to marry into wealth he didn't earn. Today's a milestone, he said to the gathered execs, clapping his hands like a camp counselor hyped for arts and crafts. $280 million and a gateway to the global market. The CFO nodded stiffly. Legal murmured something about final verification. The notary arrived. Gray suit, government badge, the demeanor of someone who's seen every brand of BS and is no longer impressed by any of it. He was there to oversee the Treasury approval packet, a process that, until very recently, would have involved me standing at his side, reviewing the authentication form, and affixing the registered seal while he recorded the chain of custody on a federal ledger. But instead, handed him a manila envelope with the bronze seal already clipped to the corner. Pre-attached like a sticker, like it was a damn coffee loyalty card. The notary stopped moving. He looked down at the seal, tapped it once, then opened the folder. Inside, my signature, still there printed neatly on the verification page. He blinked once, twice, then looked up. Whose signature is this supposed to verify? The room went quiet, not silent, quiet. The kind of thick, a natural stillness that makes you aware of your own breathing, like the air was holding its breath with you. Dominic stepped forward. That's Patricia's. She handled compliance before our restructure. The notary tilted his head slightly as if examining a dead wasp on a windowsill. Is Patricia present? No, Dominic said, trying to keep the grin glued on. She's since moved on. Was the seal reassigned through Treasury? Blank looks. Was a new authorization filed with registry? Now the silence had weight. Actual gravity. The notary set the folder down like it was radioactive. Then he pulled out a tablet, tapped a few lines, and read aloud, per 12 U.S. Code Section 1833, Federal verification of financial seals requires either the registered holder to be present or a notarized revocation with a new registered designee on file with Treasury. He turned the screen to face the room. Seal status, unassigned. No one spoke. I imagined someone's espresso machine whirring in the break room like a confused robot trying to save the moment. The CFO finally broke the silence. Can we still process the transfer today? The notary didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. Not unless you'd like to risk a federal audit and possible criminal inquiry into fraudulent verification. Legal dropped their pen. Literally. The click of it hitting the table sounded like a gunshot. Dominic stepped back. There must be a workaround. There isn't, the notary said flatly. And frankly, your use of a detached seal on a packet without holder presence or registry update borders on procedural negligence. Somewhere, someone started to sweat audibly. He gathered the papers. This transfer is frozen pending Treasury compliance revalidation. You'll need to file for seal reassignment and wait for a new authorization window. That process takes weeks. Dominic looked around the room like someone had played a prank on him. But there were no smiles now, no smirks, just a slowly dawning awareness that they hadn't just fumbled the ball, they'd run it backwards into their own end zone and set fire to the field. And that's when the panic finally started to surface, not loud or dramatic, but quiet like gas leaking under a door. The seal was real. The holder was gone, and the wire was dead. The room unraveled in slow motion. No one ran, no one screamed. But you could see it in the micro expressions, the way the CFO's jaw tensed like he was clenching down on a scream, the way the general counsel suddenly remembered he had to blink, the way someone in investor relations started typing furiously under the table like a hostage trying to signal help. Okay, said the compliance director, rifling through a folder labeled Active Registrations Finance. Let's just verify the backup designee. Pages flapped. More pages, then a pause. His hand stopped on a line that hadn't changed in nearly a decade. Seal holder, Patricia Ellery status. Active certified last review date, 03/22. He didn't say anything. Just held it there like maybe if he stared long enough it would magically update itself. Legal leaned in. Did no one process a revocation form? No one told us to. Compliance muttered, voice wobbling now. We thought HR was handling the offboarding protocol. All eyes slowly slid to Dominic. He tried to smirk. Failed, tried again. The responsibilities were transitioned internally, he said, like that sentence could be stapled to a subpoena and still hold weight. The notary, who had seen this exact corporate tap dance more times than he'd probably seen his kids, leaned back in his chair. That's not how Treasury compliance works, he said, no emotion, no emphasis. Just the deadly calm of a man with federal training and zero patience for bluffing execs. Dominic stood straighter as if height might suddenly replace facts. We reassigned Patricia's duties to our operations lead. Did you file Form TRV04? The notary asked. Dominic blinked. The what? Treasury revocation and verification update. Without it, any signatures from your organization on high-level transactions are null until a registered seal holder is validated. That's what the bronze emblem is for. It's not a decoration. It's a federal binding instrument. Silence again. The compliance director spun his laptop around. We still show Patricia's digital credentials as active. No revocation timestamp. No reassignment. And the seal serial is linked to her personal registry. Notary just raised one eyebrow and shrugged slightly. Then what you tried to execute today is void. Legal suddenly stood, one hand on their head. Oh my God, this entire transaction packet is non-compliant. Dominic tried one more time, but the seal was physically present. That has to count for something. The notary was done playing. Sir, he said, if I handcuffed myself to a fire truck, it doesn't make me a firefighter. Possession of the object doesn't make you the holder. The registry does, the law does. That was when the panic stopped being subtle. One of the investors on the call spoke up, their face frozen on screen like someone had poured cold water down their back. You're telling me we just publicly announced a $280 million deal that's now legally dead? The general counsel sat down hard. If anyone files a complaint with Treasury, this opens us to sanctions, federal penalties, potential investor fraud if we can't deliver the asset. Dominic looked around the room as if someone might still volunteer a parachute. No one moved, no one had one. And then, softly, someone from the corner said what everyone already knew. This isn't just a mistake. They all looked up. It's negligence. Willful, documented. And at the center of it, like a ghost they didn't realize they'd pissed off, was my name, still printed on every form, still tethered to every protocol, still holding the only key they never bothered to copy. I hadn't burned the bridge. They walked across it with their eyes closed, and now it was gone. My phone buzzed at 6:17 p.m. that evening with a number I hadn't seen in years. Area code from DC, last four digits oddly familiar. A board member, one of the quieter ones, the kind who sits with crossed arms and eyes that track everything but say nothing. He didn't leave a voicemail, just hung up after 3 rings like his shame had kicked in halfway through the risk. I didn't call back. At 6:21, a second buzz. Email this time, subject line, checking in. The body was blank except for his initials. I archived it without reading the rest. I already knew what he wanted. He wasn't reaching out to apologize. He was hoping to borrow a parachute from the woman they'd tossed off the plane mid-flight. By morning, the ripples had turned tidal. The compliance rumor mill, quiet, deadly, and always plugged in, had begun to murmur. You hear about Dominion Systems? They tried to push through a Treasury class acquisition without a verified seal. No holder on file. Word is, the notary froze the wire. Nothing moves faster than fear in finance. Not even greed. By noon, I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping black coffee and watching an email from one of the firm's largest institutional investors hit the wire. Following internal review, we are temporarily suspending our involvement pending clarification on Treasury compliance standing. In lawyer speak, that's a full-body flinch. That's money pulling away, eyes darting to the exits. Another alert came in, a 10% dip in after-hours trading. They hadn't told the markets. Of course they hadn't. Because to do that, you'd have to admit you fired the only person authorized to hold the damn keys. Around 2:30, I received a package, no sender listed. Inside, a sealed envelope, heavy cardstock, ivory white. Handwritten on the front, "We value integrity." Inside, a simple note, "Patricia, we've followed your career for years. When you're ready, we'd like to talk. The position is yours if you want it. And yes, we'll cover the registry transfer. No fluff, no flattery, just quiet, informed respect. The kind you only earn after 17 years of showing up, speaking carefully, and carrying weight others pretend doesn't exist." I folded the note in half, set it on the table next to the bronze seal now registered, quietly and legally to my name under my new business address. They thought removing the seal ended my role. What they didn't understand was that the seal was the role. The system didn't care what your job title said. It only cared what the ledger showed. And in that ledger, I was still the name that made money move. Meanwhile, back at the office, situation had turned into a slow corporate collapse. The lawyer, poor man, was sweating through his fourth meeting in 2 days, walking investors through why a signature no longer valid had been affixed to a federal transaction packet. He looked like someone trying to defuse a bomb with IKEA instructions and a dull spoon. Every call ended with the same question: can it be fixed? Every answer wavered. We're evaluating options. But everyone knew what that meant. They had one option, one person, and they'd walked her out with a plastic bag and an intern for backup. I didn't raise my voice, didn't post anything. I didn't need to, because sometimes the loudest revenge is the silence that follows your absence, when the system you protected turns cold and everyone realizes you weren't just a cog. You were the lock. And now the whole machine was stuck, waiting, watching the lawyer, praying for a miracle that wouldn't come. Emergency session was scheduled for 9 a.m., but most of them were already in the room by 8:20, pacing or whispering or fake sipping lukewarm coffee. The air had that brittle texture, like static clinging to everything. Even the fluorescent lights seemed nervous. They'd brought the bronze seal. Someone had dug it out of the drawer it was tossed in, polished it just enough to look presentable, and centered it on the long table like it might spontaneously forgive them. Sat there quietly, gleaming, unbothered, unclaimed. The notary arrived precisely on time, same gray suit, same government-issued neutrality, but this time his folder was thicker. This time he didn't offer any pleasantries. Just walked to the front of the room, looked at the table, and said flatly, "This is a registered Treasury seal." Silence. He tapped the folder once, then looked around the room, slow and deliberate. Removing its holder without proper reassignment, he continued, "Invalidates the entire approval chain attached to the associated transaction. The seal might as well have been a live grenade." Dominic looked like a man trying to remember what words were. He licked his lips, blinked 3 times, and finally muttered, "We didn't know." The notary didn't flinch. That is not a legal defense. The general counsel adjusted his tie, which seemed to be strangling him. "We were under the impression that duties had been transitioned. Then you should have filed the revocation. Assigned a new holder. Waited for Treasury confirmation." The notary replied, each word like a nail driven clean and smooth. "Instead, you submitted a federal-level transaction packet bearing the signature of someone no longer employed, using a seal that, per federal registry, is now invalid." He turned a page, held it up. "Status as of today, seal ID 880-4E, revoked holder transferred new registration. Patricia Ellery certified under alternate corporate entity as of November 3rd. You could feel the temperature drop. One of the investors, an older gentleman who'd been silent through most of the debacle, finally spoke, voice low and deliberate. "This alone," he said, nodding toward the seal, "could trigger a federal investigation." A pause, falsified authorization, misuse of seal property, attempted execution of an unverified wire. Nobody breathed. Dominic tried to pivot. "We believed we had operational latitude. You believed wrong," the notary interrupted, with just enough ice to slice open the illusion. "And now you've placed your entire firm in violation of federal financial code." The CFO coughed, then whispered something to legal. Legal shook his head. The movement was tiny, almost apologetic, the equivalent of shrugging while watching your own house burn down. "I'd advise you to contact Treasury," the notary added, "immediately, and I'd strongly recommend you secure outside counsel for the criminal review that will almost certainly follow." Someone in investor relations quietly stood and walked out, phone pressed to their ear. Another pulled out a packet, likely the acquisition documents, and slid them away from the center of the table like they were contaminated. The CEO, who had remained weirdly quiet until now, finally leaned forward. "What do we need to do to make this right?" he asked. The notary didn't even look at him. "You'd need to reassign the seal, file for reauthorization, have the new holder verified through Treasury's compliance division. Then and only then could you submit a new transaction packet. Timeline, the CEO asked. Best case scenario, the notary replied, 3 to 6 weeks. And just like that, $280 million deal, 3 years in the making, tied to bonuses, projections, expansion plans, stock price promises, evaporated. There was no yelling, no dramatic monologues, just the quiet, crushing realization that they'd built a castle on a foundation they didn't understand. And then removed the only woman who did. The bluff was over. The seal was back on the table, but the hands that made it matter were gone. The final Treasury notice came at 10:07 a.m. Eastern, subject line cold and clinical, seal status, revoked, holder transitioned. Reauthorization required. No exclamation points, no explanation, just the digital equivalent of a closed vault door. That email alone killed the deal. Every investor watching from a distance pulled back like they'd seen blood in the water. Phones went quiet. Scheduled interviews were canceled. Hedge fund that had promised bridge financing issued a terse statement about risk posture reevaluation. Their legal team wouldn't even take a call. By 11:30, the board gathered, this time without Dominic. He'd already been pulled into a closed-door meeting after the notary left. No one was sure what was said, but someone from HR was seen boxing up his desk before lunch. When he finally emerged, he looked smaller. He didn't carry anything, just walked out alone, a tight folder clutched under one arm. Probably his NDA. The vote was unanimous, not because the board had suddenly grown a conscience, but because they had no choice. You can't bluff your way through federal protocol, not when the system has receipts. And mine were still stamped in the registry, still locked behind encrypted verification, still tethered to my name like a ghost in the machine. My name, still on every form, still embedded in every chain of authorization. Untouched, undeniable. At 1:02 p.m., I received a third call from legal. I let it ring. The assistant let it ring. Everyone let it ring, because there was nothing to say anymore. They weren't calling to apologize. They were calling to see if I'd come save them from a fire they swore they'd never start. Instead, I sat in my new office, surrounded by walls that didn't echo with other people's decisions. Fresh bronze seal sat on my desk, registered under a new firm. A smarter one, a quieter one. My name was already in their system, logged, certified, live. The offer from the competitor had come with a bonus, freedom. I was no longer invisible. No longer the woman in the corner correcting billion-dollar mistakes while children played CEO. This office smelled like cedar, not desperation. The blinds worked. The coffee was strong. And the team, they asked before assuming. My new assistant Lacey knocked gently and stepped in with a soft smile. Patricia, I looked up from the Treasury compliance dashboard. Yeah, they're asking to speak with you. I sipped my tea, paused, then nodded once. They already did, and I ended the call. No drama, no gloating, just finality. Because the system was never broken. It was built to protect the quiet people. The ones who read the fine print, who stay late and triple-check the forms no one else bothers to open. They thought they could rewrite the rules by talking louder. I just followed the rules and let them bury themselves beneath the ones they never bothered to read. Thanks for watching, you cubicle warriors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my old boss, then you're on your own. Revenge of the coffee pot strikes again.